How you gonna walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep. How are you gonna walk through the world? So easy to screw it up. You gotta rise like the sun does every day. Rise up, look above. The light feels something like love. Hello and welcome. I'm Shelley Leedahl, a multi-genre literary writer coming to you from Ladysmith on Canada's lovely Vancouver Island. When anyone's asked what my 12 books are about, I say they're about the human heart. You see, I'm kind of a fool for love, and if you are too, then you're in the right place. This is Something Like Love, an eclectic literary podcast that explores that wildest of animals, love, through various genres. Via short stories, poetry, serializations of longer works, and personal essays, I'll pull back the blinds to reveal the lives and loves of those braving the high seas of human emotion. First up are 10 edgy short stories featuring teens learning the hard way, as we do, about familial, platonic, and romantic love, and learning to love themselves on the journey. There'll be something new to listen to every Wednesday. Do you write too? At the end of each episode, I include a springboard exercise for anyone who feels like doing a bit of their own writing. One day, in the future, there may be a forum for listeners to share their work. Step by step, people. Old dog, new tricks. I grew up on Stephen King novels and the books by other popular horror writers. To be scared was, and still is, kind of a thrill. Like many adolescents, my friends and I went through a period of fascination with the occult. Ouija boards, games like light as a feather, stiff as a board. In episode 3, you'll meet a group of teens in the small fictional town of Jackfish, Saskatchewan. It's a summer night, and one of the crew dares Buck to walk around a church 3 times at midnight holding the devil card, the Ace of Spades. Let's get started. This is Spades. It was not knowing that scared us. Things like that didn't happen in Jackfish, where everyone knew everyone else, and it was relatively safe to walk the streets at night. It didn't take long for the cops to learn about our dare at the church, and we were each brought into the station and questioned. But none of us knew any more than what we'd actually seen. Buck walking around the church. Once, twice, 3 times, and he was gone. It started out as one of those long, lazy summers when, at 15 and a half, I was too old and too cool to be dragged along on boring summer vacations with my parents, and too young to have a respectable paying job. My 2 older sisters had already graduated and left Jackfish. They broke Mum and Dad in, so that by the time I was in high school, they let me do pretty much what I wanted. I was rescued from the annual family camping trip on the strength of a half-assed babysitting job. The grueling 3 hours I spent each afternoon with the Gillis brats, changing dirty diapers, refereeing fights, was my penance for the nights when most of the kids I hung around with ended up at my place. Someone would smuggle beer from their dad's stash, or maybe there was a little pot, and we'd all sit around in the purple haze of my black-lit bedroom. The rock music was always too loud, and the neighbors sometimes complained to each other, but no one ever called the cops, because it was a small town, and Dad was a bank manager, a position which carried almost as much weight as parish priest. Some nights we'd stick a candle in a bottle and play a few rounds of truth or dare. But most of us were already getting too old for kissing games. We had real dates to experiment with. And besides, none of us girls wanted to get stuck with Buck. His real name was Bernard, but he'd been Buck since grade 2 when he was bucked off a horse and had his head stepped on. And although his misshapen face gave us girls the willies, the guys all liked him, or pretended to, because he scored them a lot of dope and was considered a little dangerous. His old man had done prison time at the Prince Albert Penitentiary for fraud, and his brother was at the prison camp north of town for a B&E. Buck's mom was the cheapest bootlegger in Jackfish. Like I was saying, Buck didn't do much for any of us girls. He had rotten yellow teeth and long greasy hair parted down the middle, and he wore his shirts open at the neck to reveal a few black hairs on his pimply white chest. His hands were permanently stained, yellow from nicotine, and this sooty black from puttering with the engine of his jacked-up Mustang. You know the type. I didn't have much say when Brad, my boyfriend of the month, showed up with Buck on my first night of parental freedom that summer. Mary Ellen and Jennifer knew I had the house to myself, so they came over, and I guess John and Robbie and the others just saw the cars at my place and thought there was a party. Like I said, it was a small town. Anyway, that night we were all sitting around listening to Pink Floyd and getting depressed when Buck said we should have a seance. We girls groaned and rolled our black-lashed eyes, but the guys thought we should try it. They called us chicken. So we whined a little longer, but eventually agreed, the way girls do when they want guys to know they're making a major sacrifice. No one really knew what to do, so we just sat around in a circle on the floor and stuck a thick white candle in the middle. We lit it and took turns asking the candle stupid questions like, "Is there a spirit in the room? If there is, the flame will rise." At first, the guy said a bunch of dumb things like if John got any last night, the flame would drop, or if Michael had a boner, the flame would rise. Nothing much happened except people kept blowing out the candle. And then it would be even blacker in the room, and a lot of oohs would go up, but no one thought anything of it. The next night, we all got together again, 8 of us, and this time, Buck got us playing that old game, Light as a Feather. You've probably played it yourself. The victim lies on the floor, and someone sits at the head, holding it. The others sit with 2 fingers underneath the body. The head person says, "He's sick," and each person repeats this. Then he says, "He's dying," as does everyone else, and finally, "He's dead." Then he says lift, and if there haven't been too many burps or giggles and each person concentrates, the victim can easily be lifted above everyone's head. It didn't always work. Sometimes someone would say the wrong thing or laugh, and Buck, whose elongated head looked even more eerie in the candle's flickering light, would get mad and would have to start all over. But when it did work, and it often did, everyone was amazed and the room always felt different after. Buck was really getting into this, and he insisted we play it night after night. He often sat at the head, which surprised us girls because it was more like Buck to take a strategic position, such as the hips or chest, when the victim was female. It was about 11 at night, Friday, 2 days before my parents were due back. We'd played the game for an hour already when Buck pulled a worn deck of cards from his jean jacket pocket and asked if anyone wanted to see the devil. Because we were afraid of Buck, we girls didn't say anything. Of course, the guys asked, "How?" Buck swore that if someone walked around a church 3 times at midnight holding the ace of spades, he would see the devil. I don't think anyone was too keen on heading out into the dark night to check out Buck's theory, but he persisted, and the guys didn't want to seem like wimps. After they said they'd go, Pam Dobson, who was 16 and had earned the nickname BJ among the guys, said she was going too. The rest of us girls followed along, some because we were too scared to be left alone in the house, others, like me, because we didn't trust our boyfriends alone with Pam. As far as churches went, there wasn't a lot of choice. There was the United Church, where many of us were baptized, and even though we thought it terrifically boring, we didn't exactly want to desecrate it. There was the Presbyterian Church, a plain white stucco affair in a lot overrun by quackgrass. The Faith Center, where we heard strange things like altar calls took place, and many of us considered it to be a kind of religious cult. The Jehovah's Witness Hall, which in a 5-3 vote we determined didn't really qualify as a church, and the Roman Catholic Church, a huge, sprawling brick affair, complete with bats that swooped from the steeple towards our hair. It was on the outskirts of town, a fair distance even in Jackfish, which also sprawled, as if the early residents weren't quite sure they wanted to be part of the community. The strange thing was that we decided not to drive. A bunch of 15, 16, and 17-year-olds with pimped-out cars, and we chose to walk. Buck led the way. The rest of us followed, a loose pack of disciples. And soon we were there, huddling on the gray concrete steps beneath the massive oak doors. Buck pulled out his deck of cards, fanned it, then withdrew the ace of spades and swung it in front of the guys, daring them to take the walk. No one moved. The wind has a funny way of coming up unexpectedly on the prairies, and it chose that moment to rattle through the long grass, rush up our sleeves and down our necks. Buck broke the silence. "Come on, you guys, it's 10 to 12. It only works at midnight." Still, no one offered. "Okay, what'll you give me?" he asked, then took a long drag on his cigarette. "What do I get?" The guys pulled out their wallets. We looked in our handbags, and together we came up with $34. Buck accepted the wrinkled bills and loose coins in his grubby fingers. Then he gave me the money to hold. There was no giggling now, only the rustle of old newspapers being swept against the church. Buck held the ace in his right hand and left us on the steps as he walked around the corner of the church into the enormous dark. It was 5 minutes before he rounded the other side. "One," he said, and smiled, showing us his stained teeth. We shivered and didn't say much. Those of us who had partners shrunk into their arms. The second time around, Buck must have walked more slowly because it was 10 or 15 minutes before he jumped out from behind the corner and yelled, "2." We may have felt like stopping him then. I know I did. But no one said a word, and Buck walked past us again. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. We thought he was trying to scare us, and we waited, thinking Buck would come howling around that corner any minute. 15, 20 minutes passed, and still Buck didn't show. Brad and Robbie and some of the others started cursing Buck, calling him a stupid SOB and saying how they were going to wail on him when he came back. Mary Ellen said it had been too long, and we'd better go look for him. It was a group effort. No one wanted to be alone, and we shifted together like a dark shadow around that church, around the back, the rectory, and the old sheds where we imagined chipped ceramic saints stood comforting each other in musty storage. We called, "Buck," softly at first, so the people in the wartime houses across the street wouldn't hear us, then more loudly, as the night got older and we became more afraid. Louder, as if our own voices could be any comfort on that windy night in July. By 2 o'clock, we still hadn't found him, and nobody thought it was funny, his trying to scare us like that. Except for Tracy and Jennifer, who were supposed to be home by 1:30, everyone else came back to my place. We sat around the television, flicking from channel to channel with all the house lights on. I quietly thanked God that my parents would be home in a few days, and I didn't sleep until dawn. On Saturday, Brad phoned to say that Buck hadn't shown up for work at the co-op where they both packed groceries. Brad phoned Buck's mom, who told him Buck hadn't slept at home, and did we know where the hell he was, and could we tell him to get his skinny ass home? That was when we really started to worry. There weren't too many places Buck could go. We thought he might have planned a little escapade with Pam, but we questioned her, and she pretended to be offended and swore on a Bible that she didn't know where he was. On Sunday, the cops had an APB out on Buck, and the whole town was buzzing. My parents had heard the news on the radio, and I'm not ashamed to say that I ran out to the car when they drove up. I broke down like a blubbering idiot, as if I'd really cared about Buck. A farmer found the body 5 days later. It was half hidden in a hollow near the river that runs north of town, a few miles behind the Roman Catholic Church. Old Jake Waterman was fishing when he noticed a raven circling high above him. The thing wouldn't go away, he told the cops, circling like a hawk, but it was a raven, he was sure. Waterman thought there must be a dead gopher or rabbit nearby, and he lodged his fishing rod into the sand. It had been hot. The rancid odor led him to Buck's body. You know how rumors spread in small towns. The coroner said it was a heart attack, and we might have believed him, but someone must have dragged Buck out to the river, and the police had no suspects, not one shred of evidence. Some say Buck's eyes had turned yellow, and that one had rolled or been pulled out of its socket. Others say his hands were chopped off and forced inside his mouth. We bought flowers for the casket with the $34, Buck's money. Those of us who were at the church the night he disappeared clung together like conspirators in a dark secret. But there was no secret, except Buck's own, and he wasn't telling a soul. That story was Spades, written and read by me, Shelley Leedahl. Music, well, you can blame that on me too. Zak Cohen produced. The story previously appeared in my short story collection Sky Kickers and in the anthology Great Canadian Murder and Mystery Stories. I also read the story in dozens of high schools across Saskatchewan. How about doing some writing of your own? Maybe you can channel your inner Stephen King. Nightmares, inanimate objects coming to life, the creature that could be in the closet. What scares you? When you write, think about how mood can be created through a variety of means, like describing weather or through descriptions of sound. Remember to show emotion rather than telling readers a character was terrified or relieved. Please join me next Wednesday for episode 4. We'll be going to the beach with Alexandra, an imaginative teen who lost some of grade 11 due to mononucleosis. She witnesses an act of bullying at the beach that will stay with her always. The 10 stories in the Something Like Love series were made podcastable via the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Originals Grant Program. Deep bows. How are you going to walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep.